Okay, cool. Well, thanks for those that did come. I hope we had a magical journey together. This is your brain on Bayes, and what we're going to do is sort of look at how this theory of updating probabilities can explain interesting things like visual illusions, or even like how to make good decisions. So my name is Ryan. I am a grad student in the Center for Neuroscience, which is like right over there. And I encourage you guys to ask a bunch of questions, and don't hesitate to stop me at any point, because this is all for you, and I want you guys to sort of understand what's going on and appreciate the coolness of it all. So we're going to start with a cool illusion. Let's see if I can make this work.
This is the hollow head. Actually, at the moment, it's a perfectly normal head of Charlie Chaplin, but wait, as it comes round, you'll see, or will you, that it's hollow. The back of it, coming round now, is actually a hollow mask. It appears to rotate in the opposite direction, and amazingly, the nose sticks out, although it's actually sticking in. Coming round now is the normal, correct, as it were, face.
So what do you guys think?
It's a bit confusing actually when it turns around. Then you see one face on one side, another face on another side.
Yeah,
you don't really know which way it goes.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on, right? I mean, so you see the face, kind of the inside of the mask is popping out. And it's, I mean, does anybody have any idea why your brain might be doing that to you? Okay, good. Oh, you got it out in the back. Okay.
Because the shading is similar to when it's popping out right there, and when it's popping in, it's similar. So it's like your brain has to think a certain way because you've seen it like this before, then you just perceive it the same way.
Yeah, you're totally onto it. You know, it's ambiguous because there's two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and so it looks like what a face normally looks like. And you've seen a bunch of faces before, and they're popping out. So when you see it like that, your brain's like, oh, that one must be popping out too. Something must be fooling me, but let's make it normal. So the question we want to sort of understand, or ask, and what we want to get an intuition for, is how is your brain going through this process to take what is the real truth of the matter, that is the inside of the mask, and altering it so that it pops out for you. And then what is the sort of advantage of doing this? Okay, well, I'll be at the top, but we won't be up that high too much. So the idea is that often when we're sort of looking at the world and taking measurements or taking observations, what we have is sort of a lack of sufficient evidence to really know what's going on in the world. So this is a picture, and you see a guy, and what do you guys see here? Let's tell me what you see. Someone standing up looking at a picture on a wall, right? Sorry? Is it? Yeah, it's in the corner. You can kind of see here. There's like a line, but you know, it's a guy standing up, and there might be, you know, another wall blocking him or something like that. Well, you've all been fooled. He's on the ground, and the picture has been rotated. So the question is, what happened? Well, we didn't have enough information to know whether he was standing on the ground like this and being rotated, or sitting. So what we did was we made an inference. And what's an inference? Inference is drawing a conclusion about something based on incomplete and imperfect observation. So this is an incomplete and imperfect observation because there's something obstructing our view, and so we can't tell what the actual state of the man is. Is he standing, or is he crouched and bent over? But again, most of the time when we see something like this and something's blocking our view, then we're used to that being because someone's actually standing up. So again, you infer that, oh, this person must be standing. So now let's kind of formalize the smart way to do inference. So inference is just generally trying to figure out, based on incomplete information, what the best guess of the scenario is. But you can do that very poorly, or you can do that very well. So we want to do it well because we're all smart here. So the first thing that you want to do is take into account your expectations, like we talked about with the face. Whether or not you have some sort of prior information or prior experience about the situation or any beliefs that you have. You know, I believe that this might be this way because I'm expecting it to be this way. Then you want to look at your current observations. So you're looking at that picture of the guy standing or the guy crouching, and you say, well, you know what? It looks to me more like he's standing than he's crouching. If you were crouching, the picture would have been rotated the other way. And so you're going to take those observations, combine them with your expectations, and look at all the possibilities and then select which is the most probable one. So the correct inference, in other words, the best inference you can make, is the inference which is the most probable or most likely to be true based on the evidence that you have and these sort of prior expectations that you have developed over years and years of time. So, one way to do inference, and some would say the best way to do inference, the most optimal way to do inference, is a theorem called Bayes' theorem. So I'm going to drop out the math, but if you guys want or are interested, we can show it. And instead, I'm going to do it in sort of a graphical format. So again, Bayes is a way to sort of combine this previous experience with current evidence in order to generate these probabilities that we're going to then use to make our inferences. So what we want to do is compute these probabilities, and these are the probabilities of having a particular state of the world. So the probability that the mask is inside or outside, or the probability that the man is standing or sitting. The way we do that is we take our evidence, so evidence that the man is standing or sitting, and then we multiply each piece of evidence by our prior expectation about that state of the world. And again, these prior expectations come from our previous experience. So we can look at the case of the man in the painting. So first, we think one possibility is that the painting of Mona Lisa is on the wall and the man is standing. So let's think of what our evidence would be. Well, it looks like, it's upright, and the walls usually stand upright, floors usually are down on the floor. So we have pretty high evidence that Mona Lisa is on the wall. Also, paintings are usually hung on walls. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a painting on the floor. Maybe if you go to like the MoMA or something like that. But paintings are usually hung on walls. So there's also, we have a high prior or high expectation that the painting is going to be on the wall. So if we multiply those two together, then we have a high probability that the painting's on the wall. But there's another possibility that the painting's on the floor and the photo's been rotated. And again, our evidence for that is pretty low because we don't have anything sort of indicating us that the photo has been rotated because it's been blocked. And secondly, we don't have a sort of high expectation that this is going to happen. Why would I mean, I guess maybe if you're in this class, you might bump this up a little more because I'm going to trick you a little bit. But in reality, your expectations that the painting is on the floor are pretty low. So if you multiply this guy by this guy, you're going to end up with a low probability that the painting is on the floor. And so then what you do in the inference step is you look at these two probabilities and say, oh, this is the biggest one. All right, this is what I'm going to believe. Question?
Shouldn't the fact that Mona Lisa's on the floor also be able to cross our mind? Why doesn't that happen? It did cross my mind, so shouldn't it cross it?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. Maybe because it's, these are just sort of random things that I put in here, but in reality, this is probably really, really small. Because how many times really do you see a painting on the floor? In reality, this is really, really small. So it's almost non-existent, the expectation. Yeah?
Wait, shouldn't the Mona Lisa on the wall and the Mona Lisa on the floor be the same? Because if you're considering prior knowledge to the fact that to make the Mona Lisa on the floor lower, then evidence is really prior knowledge. So when you're finding evidence, if it's just observations, shouldn't they just be the same at the same level?
That's an interesting point, and I guess, they could be. This is, again, sort of a tricky thing where we don't have an actual measurement of what your evidence really is. So if we were doing this in an experimental setting, for example, we might have some calculation of how tilted the picture is, and then depending on the tilt of the picture, it's stronger evidence for it being on the floor, or stronger evidence for it being on the wall, and then measure someone's how they sort of do these probabilities given that tilt. So again, this is just kind of like a hand-wavy observation. We'll actually get into something where we have some numbers, and so it'll be a little more concrete, and maybe that will help you see it a little better. So what do we do inference in real life? Well, you guys all know about crime scene investigation. So how are they doing inference? Well, they get a little bit of a sample of DNA. They get some trajectories of the bullets and little pieces of information, but they don't know exactly what the event that happened was. So they have to put all these bits of information together and sort of come up with an inference about what happened. Another example, which has been in the news a lot recently, is the Malaysian plane crash. So again, there's a signal from the black box here, there's a floaty thing in a satellite picture here, there's this thing that washed up on the beach, but not enough information. So we have incomplete observations, and we need to infer where the location of the plane is. And actually what's cool about this, and this is from the New York Times, is they actually did this process of this, I don't know if this was exactly days, they did some mathematical inference and were able to draw out the probabilities of the plane being in a particular location, and then that helped make the search more targeted. And lastly, so an example that we're going to go over is medical diagnosis. So again, if you're a doctor, you have a patient and it has a bunch of symptoms, but you don't know what's causing those symptoms, so you have to infer from those symptoms what's going on. No, that's all right. So what happens if you're a doctor and you have to do inference in order to determine a medical diagnosis? Well, let's say you have a patient that comes in and she has a headache, and you think, oh, maybe it could be this disease, and this disease happens in 5% of the population, so it's something that is reasonable to test for. So you're going to perform a test, and the patient, whatever is really true, whether the patient has the disease or not, is going to determine the test result. So we're going to call this the probability of getting a certain test result, either positive or negative, given the state of the patient, so whether or not the patient is sick. But the problem with the test is that these are, not entirely accurate diagnostics, and so the test could be incorrect. So for this example, we're going to say that the probability that having a positive test, given that you have a disease, so in other words, the test accurately saying you have the disease, is 99%. But there's also a 1% chance that you test negative even if you have disease. So that is sort of a false negative. On the other hand, if you're healthy, this test gives you a 3% false positive rate, which means that you could test positive for the disease even though you're healthy. And the probability of testing negative when you're healthy, which is the right answer, happens 97% of the time. So overall, this test is pretty good. It seems to get the right answer most of the time. So in order to do this inference, what we're going to do is, rather than thinking about the probability of the test result given the state of the patient, because that's what we already know, we have all this other past examples of people that have taken the test. What we need to do this inference is switch these guys and think about what is the probability of the state of the patient. What is the probability that the person is sick or healthy, given that I, the doctor, or we, the doctors, have gotten a certain test result. So we need to have the same sort of way of combining current evidence, in other words, the test result, with past evidence, in other words, the strength and reliability of the test. So again, we want to ask, if the patient tests positive, what is the probability that they have the disease? Now, do you guys, anybody want to speculate on, we can bring back the numbers here. Does anyone want to speculate? If if we have a patient who tests positive, what do you think? Probably.
I'm not sure about the exact number, but it should be 5% times 99% plus 99% times, I'm sorry, 95% times 3%.
You're kind of there. I mean, you're in the right ballpark in the sense that, yeah, there's like has to be some normalizations that go on and stuff, but you're right where you're combining past and previous evidence. So we'll get to that. But naively, if you weren't knowing what to expect here, you might think, oh, if you test positive, I mean, who thinks that it's very likely that if they test positive, that, you know, over 90% likely if you test positive, you're going to be sick? Anybody? How about over 75%? Okay, how about 50%? So the rest of you guys think that if I test positive, there's a less than 50% chance that I have the disease. Yeah? Okay, well, we'll see how it turns out. So, surprise, we're going to use base theorem to compute this. So again, the thing is we want to compute the probability that the patient is sick or healthy given that they tested positive. And we're going to use the evidence, which is the probability of whether they will test positive if they're healthy or sick, and the expectation that they're going to be sick, given what's happened in the past. So we want to compute this probability. So first, let's think about the prior. Well, we know that 5% of the people have the disease. So the prior for being sick is 5%. And then 95% of the people are healthy, so the prior for being healthy is 95%. Now we need to consider the evidence. So we discussed this in the earlier slide, and this has to do with the reliability of the test that we're going to use. So the evidence for having the disease is the probability that you test positive given that you have the disease. So that's 99%. So again, a good test. The evidence of being healthy is the probability that you test positive given healthy, and that's 3%. So now we want to see what is the probability that we have, given that we tested positive, what is the probability that we have the disease or that we're healthy? And the way you do that is by multiplying, just like was suggested, each of these two guys together. So the probability of having the disease is 5% times 99%, which is 0.0495. And the probability of being healthy is 95% times 3%, which is 0.0285. Now, does anybody know what's wrong with these two numbers? Yeah.
Well, what happens if they tested healthy but they actually have the disease because the test was wrong?
So that's a different, you'd have to do the math differently. You'd have to...
So you only took two of the possibilities out of four.
Yeah, so well, this is considering, say we are doctors, right, and we know that they tested positive. So now we want to be able to judge whether or not they have the disease. You're right, let's say they tested healthy, and we wanted to know whether or not what the chances are that they still have the disease even when they tested healthy, then these numbers would stay the same because this is always going to be true. This is, again, based on the past. And what we would do here is instead of looking at the correct positive test, we would look at the incorrect or false negative test and then the correct healthy test and use those numbers to compute these. But does anybody know what's wrong with these numbers? If I'm going to call these probabilities, can anybody tell me? I don't know if you guys are familiar, probably not. Do you have a thought? So the trick with probabilities is that they have to, if I'm covering all the possible scenarios, so you're either healthy or you're sick, you can't be in between.
Oh,
Then,
so it has to add up to 1.
Exactly, it has to add up to 1. So the way we get these guys to add up to 1 is we normalize by the sum, so we add the two of them together and then divide both by that number. And so we get that if you test positive in this test, there's a 63% chance that you're sick, but there's still a 37% chance that you're healthy. So if you were a doctor, would you recommend an aggressive treatment for someone that tested positive to this?
No.
No, right? Because they might not be sick. And so why do something? So what would you do instead?
Give them a small dose.
Yeah, you could do something that's less aggressive. You could maybe perform another test, a different test, not the same test, but we're going to do a different test to sort of confirm the results. So yeah, there's lots of things to do. But again, it's something that, I don't know if doctors are actually trained on this, but like you might think that, wow, it's 99% accurate, so if they get the disease, they're 99, or they test positive, they're 99% likely to have it, but it's actually a pretty big difference. All right, so let's now move on to figure out this. That was an example of sort of days in real life, but how is days happening in your brain? And the great example for what's going on is these illusions. So we can return to our. I guess first, again, to remind you, what we're doing, what our brain is doing, is inference. So again, we look at the world and we have all this perceptual information coming in. But we might have sort of incomplete and imperfect observations. So you could be in a condition where things are obstructed by other things. You could be in a condition where it's dark, kind of like this room, you can't really see things. Or you could be, if it's foggy and so it's sort of harder to see things. So you have your brain has especially particularly your perceptual system in your brain. So the part that makes you understand what you're seeing, what you're sensing, has this built in to automatically do this kind of Bayesian probability update. And the reason why this is because a lot of our things that we observe are consistent, and not necessarily equally consistent, but consistent with many possible states of the world. But as an agent, as someone who has to do something and act on the world and what's going on, you can't say, well, it might be this, or it might be this, or it might be this, so I'm going to do all these different things. You have to do something based on what you think the world is, so your brain has to define sort of, in a sense, a single thing that you're going to act on. And so the reason we sort of think of perception as inference is because your brain is drawing conclusions about the state of the world based on this sort of incomplete sensory information. So your brain in the perception, and by perception, I guess to clearly define what I mean is taking in sensory information like photons from the room hitting your eyes and turning that into something more cognitive, which means understanding that there are, 10 people in the room in front of me and not just a bunch of purple and black and gray photons hitting my eyes. And then turning that, and so I need to do that, but I need to do that based on the fact that I don't have all the information available to me. So we can go back to this first illusion that we saw, and we can think, okay, your brain sees, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And it's asking, what's going on here? What is this a face going in or a face going out? But your observations, well, this could be a face going in, it's hard to tell. And it could be a face going out. Our observations are consistent with both hypotheses. So, because of this ambiguity, what we need to do is do the inference and use our prior expectations to resolve this ambiguity. So again, we're going to look at this same sort of graphical description of the problem. And this time we have, as was sort of mentioned before, we have equal evidence, right? This time we're going to call it equal evidence for a convex face or concave face. So if you were to ignore your prior expectations, then you would be lost. You'd say, is that a convex face or a concave face? And sort of one example of where this might be a little bit more obvious is, have you guys seen or heard of the Necker cube? It's like, but it's like the wire cube. Sometimes it points out and then sometimes it points in. I'll just talk about awesome things. Let's see if I can draw this well enough that you can see it. So sometimes you'll see this as being the front, and sometimes you'll see this as being the front. And because there's, again, equal evidence, but now you don't have as strong of a prior, then your perception will bounce back and forth between the two. But in the hollow mask case, we have a very strong prior, so you almost never see the inside of the mask facing out. So we have this equal evidence, but we need to figure out what is this prior. So what do you guys think? Where does the prior come from?
Well, how you see people's faces, obviously people's faces don't go this way.
Yeah,
They go this way, so it's called that.
exactly. Every day you're walking down the street, and you can sort of think of it as every time you see a face that points out, it adds a little bit of evidence to that, a little more evidence, and then you go down to Times Square and it's busy, so you get a bunch of evidence, ton of evidence, and then it's like October, and you go to the Halloween store, and you all of a sudden see these masks. You're like, wait, oh, faces go in. All right, well, there's a little evidence for this too. But then Halloween's over, you walk around again, and you get a bunch more information, and so you end up with this strong prior for having a convex face. So we can fill our prior into here. And now again, the basic straightforward problem of multiplying these two guys together. If we take our strong prior and multiply it with our medium convex face, we have a high probability that the face is convex. If we take a low prior for a concave face, so the face pointing in, and multiply it with this medium evidence, then we have a low probability of having a concave face. And then, again, our brain is sort of doing this all automatically for us. You're not consciously aware of the fact that, even though you know you're seeing a concave face, you're not consciously aware of the fact that the brain is discounting that and making it turn to convex. So the brain kind of then computes this probability, and that's what it makes you perceive. So that's what you believe you're seeing, even though you know it's not true. And it's amazing because you can think as hard as you want about what is going on here. But no matter how hard you try, the inside of the face, the inside of the mask always looks like it's a face popping out. Now what's really cool is that there are a lot of disorders of the brain. And some disorders of the brain, people actually don't perceive this illusion. So schizophrenia is an example, where in schizophrenia, people that are shown this rotating mask actually see the inside of the mask, and they don't see it as a face popping out. So, it's somebody's working on understanding why that is, but it sort of suggests that this system that combines this prior expectation with this evidence isn't entirely intact for people that have schizophrenia. And maybe that can partially explain some of the symptoms. For example, people with schizophrenia, and this is me, this might not be true at all in terms of whether or not this is actually how it works, but people with schizophrenia have hallucinations and different sort of that perceive things that aren't real. And most of us, for example, would have a prior that if you start hearing voices in your head, you're like, hey, voices don't just come out of nowhere. I have a strong prior for, the fact that even if I hear something, I'm just imagining it versus there's really someone talking to me. And so when I combine that with the equal evidence that I'm hearing something, then it's still more likely that I'm just imagining it. But if you have schizophrenia and you don't have this prior that's feeding into your evidence, then all you hear is someone talking to you and you think, oh boy, somebody must be talking to me even though there's no one in the room. So again, that could maybe be an explanation for why one of these symptoms of schizophrenia arises. So let's look at a couple other cool illusions and let's sort of try and figure out what's going on here. So what do you guys see in this here? Yeah.
32 circles coming this way, 32 coming back.
Yeah, so it's like these look like little dimples going in,
Yeah.
and these look like little bumps coming out, right? Why do you guys think that? Because it's flat. You can come up and touch it if you want, but they're flat.
Also like the shadow.
The shadow.
Yeah, right. So the shadow gives you an indication of whether or not they're pointing out or pointing in. But why is a shadow up here a dimple and a shadow down here? Yeah.
Because the sunlight or the light is coming from this way, making the dimple come out underneath. And as well, because the sunlight is shining on this part of the circle that's carved in, this part of the circle is shaded.
Good. Does anybody else want to try it? That's right, but you didn't say it exactly the way I wanted you to say it. Does anybody have any other thoughts of what?
But what if the sun's at the bottom of it, or the light source?
That's a good question. What if, yeah, so how do you know the sun's at the bottom or the top?
Well, the shadow, that's...
What? But if the sun were down here, then these would be a shadow, right?
but then the shadow would be all around. most likely.
Yeah, I guess so. In the back, you have a thought.
Maybe the concave ones, they have a more definite shape rather than the convex ones because they the outline. Because it's like more of a 2D circle. You could if you look at it, but if you look on the other ones, you could look at it a bit more curved, maybe because the outline is less definite than the others.
So your, let me see if I can make this work. Claim is that these guys, there's a difference between the outside of these two things, right? So these are less defined than these, therefore these look like they're going inside. All right, let's see if we can make this happen. So if that were the case, then if I spin this 180 degrees, they wouldn't change. But they changed, right? So now the dimples are on these two sides. Or you would see the same ones. So I spun it, the ones that were dimples before would still look like dimples if it had to do with the outside. So if we think back to the lighting, right? What's going on with the lighting is you're right, that you think that the light is coming from the top, right? But why do you think the light is coming from the top? And the sun's a really good hint. Think about priors. What's our prior about light coming from the top? Do we usually have lights on the floor, or do we usually have lights up high? Up high, right? So again, we're used to seeing things lit from the top. So when you see a shadow up here and a light part up here, you think, well, you know, your brain is without you. You know, we weren't even conscious of it because you didn't say, oh, I think, you know, or I'm thinking that usually the light comes from the top. So your brain just says, oh, the light must be coming from the top, which is exactly how you put it, right?
Yeah.
Can you put it sideways?
Yeah. That's an interesting one, actually. I wonder what we will perceive. Because we have, I would assume that we don't have a strong prior for light coming from the right or the left, but maybe we do. Is that crooked or is that?
Oh no, that seems a bit weird.
Yeah, I never thought about doing this. I stopped now and come back here and look at it.
Yeah, it looks a bit more fun.
It's kind of
Switching.
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, that's a great point,
Prior
right?
knowledge tells us that it doesn't make sense.
Well, think about it. It's like the Necker cube, right? So with the Necker cube, with this, we don't have our prior is going to be flat, and by flat I mean my trusty chalk. And our prior is going to look like this, where light coming from the right and light coming from the left are totally even. So then it's sort of up to your cognitive state or whatever to get these things to switch back and forth, much like the cube here, sort of what you're thinking, oh, okay, now it's facing it out this way, now these are dimples, now these are dots. Huh, that's a great, I never even thought of that, but it's kind of cool. I'll tell, I worked with one of the professors there, and I'll have to tell him that because he will appreciate that being another twist on this example.
What about the Necker cube? I have like a hard time seeing it as the face on the top being in front. I always see it as the face on the bottom.
So you bring up a good point, and I was kind of cheating when I was using that as an example because this is actually a better example for an equal prior. You actually have a prior for these sorts of things too, which is typically when you're looking at things, I think it's that you're looking down on them. So it's like your typical perspective is seeing things from a certain way, and therefore that way explains this is what you typically see in the front, right, rather than the other one. Yeah. So it's something about like your usual perspective of seeing. I forget the exact explanation for it, but yeah, you're right. There is, and they've done this experimentally. They've tested people and they asked them, you know, push this button if you see this is the face, and this button if you see this is the face, and people see this like significantly more than they see this one as being in the front face. So you're not alone in that. All right, on to the next one.
Yeah.
All right. Hope that looks all right. And then we can put it full screen again. All right, that's better. All right, so what do you guys think? First of all, what's the illusion here?
It's a waterfall. That's the illusion.
Right.
That there is. It's just tools.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? What do you think's down here? Is there like a huge gap down here?
No.
Isn't it just like a green screen?
No, it's what's the floor. This is actually, these are really cool, but it's painted on the floor.
Oh.
So you have to be at like the exact right angle for this to work. There's a million, they're called anamorphic
yeah.
paintings. And there's like millions of examples on the internet. There's some like really cool, gigantic ones. So yeah, so this is actually the floor, but it looks like it's this crazy, waterfall that this guy's gonna fall off. So what is our prior?
Our prior is that everything always stands up. Nothing. When you see something that looks like a waterfall or something that looks like a Coke can, they always are 3D. They're always real.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And life isn't 3D. It's our prior. So when you see something that's three-dimensional looking, even though it's on a flat thing, you assume, oh, that must have depth. And that's why you can see all these cool any paintings that have perspective. You sort of perceive it as being three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional. Anybody else have any thoughts about this?
The prior be that we don't see giant sprite cats.
That's another prior. But what would that prior update?
That is not real.
That's not real. Okay, that's an interesting point. So then you might, but if then your sort of inference were that it wasn't real, you'd almost be less likely to think, oh my God, this guy's gonna fall, right? So you'd have a strong sense that, oh, he's gonna be fine because it's not real. And maybe, I think for that sort of inference, I think it's less implicit in the sense that it doesn't happen kind of without your consciousness. But I think that's something that happens more consciously. Like you're thinking, oh, okay, well something's got to be going on here. There's this gigantic spray can. Well, that can't be a real spray can. So maybe this can't be a real waterfall. So what's happening?
There's also a highway sign in the middle of the lake.
Yeah, well, it fell when the road collapsed.
Oh.
And also the environment, you can see like the windows on like an office setting, so you can tell like.
There we go. Yeah. So you have to use all your context clues around you to make inferences. Yeah. I mean, how many roads do you see that go through office buildings? Yeah.
But wouldn't a prior only exist to each individual? No prior to be the same. So perception of from a single person cannot always be the same as someone else.
Yeah, that's totally true. So, I mean, for the most part, well, I guess there's two ways you can get a prior, right? That they either come from, and most likely it's a combination of the two, but that they're from experience. So, you see a bunch of faces, but also innate. So, genetically, you're born to be wired a certain way so that faces are pointing out, or so that, three-dimensional things look three-dimensional. And so, but because of this combination of innateness, which is still random due to the reasonably random due to the genetics, and then experience, which everybody has different experiences, then you're right, everybody's prior is going to be slightly different. But what happens when you see something like this illusion or the previous illusion is that everything essentially collapses to one state or the other, right? And so even though we have my prior for, light from above might be slightly higher than your prior from light from above, but they're both high enough to make us perceive the light from above. There's interesting evil experiments that were done before the time of animal rights, where they would raise cats in rooms that had either only horizontal lines or only vertical lines. And so these cats would basically develop a prior that is, the only things that exist are horizontal lines or vertical lines. And then they would put them, say it was a cat that was raised with a room with just horizontal lines, they would put them in a room with obstacles, vertical obstacles, and the cats would just walk right into them. Because their prior was so strong about, that can't be a real thing because it's vertical, that they didn't think of it as real and think of it as an object that they could bump into, and then they would bump into it. These things do not happen anymore at all, but they're still interesting to talk about.
So that would be based on the blank paradigm theory that no one's born knowing anything?
I don't know if it necessarily says that. I actually can't answer that question. I don't think there's anybody that can. But it suggests that a lot of things are learnable, and this is one of those things that's learnable. But
but aren't you kind of when you're born? Aren't you born to know like who your mom is technically? I guess you can say that.
maybe not know who your mom is, but I think there's some innateness in knowing that there is a mother figure that you hold on to. Because you've probably seen videos of like the ducklings that will like follow the man around because he was the first thing that they saw when they were born.
Yeah.
So they you know, latch on to some parental figure, but it might not necessarily be their true mother. But yeah, you're right. That is something that's very innate because from the very start they, you know, have some kind of bond. But in terms of innateness, and especially with these visual bars and orientations, we have enough time to go a little off topic here. So we're going to go a little off topic. So the way your brain works is with sort of electrical signals. And your brain cells can have little like impulses, little blasts of electrical activity that kind of create and send information around your brain. So part of your brain that is essentially connected with your eyes, is one of the first stages in the brain that does this visual processing. And what it's interested in, what it responds to, is essentially lines that are oriented in particular directions. So you might have one brain cell that is very responsive to a line that's like this, but doesn't have any electrical impulses when the line's like this. You might have another brain cell that's the opposite, that has a lot of impulses like this, but not one like this. And what's interesting is that if you look at even with juvenile brains, if you look at the distribution of brain cells based on their orientation, if this is going to be horizontal, and then slightly more, and vertical, and slightly more, whoops, and vertical. Chalk is an antiquated technology. So I hope you can see that. This is the horizontal ones, and then these are the vertical ones, and then things in between going each direction. What you find is you have more cells for vertical things, fewer for diagonals, more cells for horizontal things, again fewer diagonals, and then more cells for vertical things. And that seems kind of weird when you first think about it, right? Because it's like, why would you have more brain cells that respond to horizontal and vertical orientations than respond to things that are slightly diagonal? Does anybody have any speculations on why your brain might do that?
Well, your brain always sees like, they don't often see diagonals. They see, like, let's say the smartboard, you see things vertically or horizontally. This chalkboard, you see things vertically or horizontally, but you tend to not see things.
Exactly. So people have done this where they take like thousands and thousands of pictures and they do some complicated algorithms that the computer science people can tell you about to actually figure out what way the lines are oriented. And what they find is that the distribution of lines in space is very similar to the distribution of orientation to neurons in your brain. So that's something that suggests that it might be innate, right? Because this is reasonably true in juvenile animals. Yeah.
My math teacher told me about this once. They said they did an experiment. They asked a bunch of elementary school kids to tell them what a triangle is, right? They showed them a triangle with a hypotenuse as the base and holding it on the two legs like this. And then they said that's a triangle, but then when they showed the elementary school students what the base on the top of two legs like this, they didn't know what it was.
Huh. Interesting. I wonder if that could. Yeah, I don't know. So this is the state of the art in neuroscience, where we're not at triangles yet. We're at straight lines. So I don't know what we could conclude from that. But I mean, it's probably something similar where you're used to seeing certain shapes in this way, and then upside down, there are less things that happen like that naturally. So it's hard to see. Okay, back to the story. We actually only have one more thing, which is kind of cool. One more video here. Pay close attention to this one, because it's kind of hard to catch it.
The doorstep. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in the study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else.
So what do you guys think the prior is in this situation? Yeah,
There's a person there
Yeah.
There-
asking for directions.
there's a person that asks for directions, and what about them?
They want to know where they go, so they won't leave until.
Yeah, exactly. Like people, when you're having a conversation, people don't change in the middle of a conversation, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but that's only happened to me 5 times, and that's when I say something that I've like embarrassed myself. I gotta get out of here. But yeah, people don't like switch right in the middle of conversations. So again, even though it's so obvious to us that the guy had a different haircut, probably had a different voice, had a different jacket on, but you're not used to that happening, so you are sort of blind to the reality that there's a new person standing there. So again, another interesting one. There's tons and tons of examples of these things on the internet. You guys should totally go on Google and search all around for it. So, to kind of wrap this all up, and we can have some time for more questions or discussion at the end. The big thing here is that perception is not necessarily reality. So what you see, what you think you're seeing, might not be what there really is. And the reason for this is, again, our observations are incomplete and imperfect. We don't have all of the information that's available to us in the world to understand exactly what's going on. And because of this, our brain sort of uses evidence and also our prior expectations to sort of combine the two of those and infer what is really happening. But these inferences might be incorrect because our prior might be stronger than what really is the state of the world. So anytime you see something weird going on, always ask yourself, what's the prior? Why am I perceiving this weird thing? All right, so thanks you guys, and thanks to the crowd. Oh, and I have one more thing to end with too, which is about the world is not what we think it is. Let's see how it is.
The Matrix is a system.
Oh, yeah.
That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again.
I don't believe that we're living in the Matrix, but yeah, it's an interesting philosophical thought. So you guys have any questions or anything you want to chat about more? Yeah, you have a thought?
In my theory of knowledge class, we did this thing about self-perception, language, and everything. And one thing came up in language I didn't understand is the fact that people, their language is not one thing, it's multiple things. We use it in many different ways, in many different types of languages. Yeah, if I do this, this is up, and if I do this, this is down, this is left, this is right. Why do people recognize this as up? Yet in language, if I say up, they don't understand.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I guess maybe because language itself is somewhat arbitrary, right? So why does UP in the sound p mean this? But everybody knows that this sort of provides some indication of the direction we're going, right? So it's sort of like, you know, or just like when you point to things, like I don't know how to say computer in Mandarin, but if I talk to somebody and go to China and you go like this, they'll know that I'm talking about the computer. So I think anytime you sort of indicate things, people are, and that's again something that might be innate, where it's like your attention is directed to a particular thing, and then you understand. But then you also have to infer that you have to think, okay, this person is trying to communicate something to me, and he's pointing to this, so he must be trying to say something about the computer.
But why does this go and put into question that object? Why does it do that? Like, why do we notice that?
Yeah, so I think it's all about like attending, right? So when you're having a conversation with someone, for example, if you're in a busy room, you might find it harder to understand what they're saying, or even like in class, when people are talking in class, it's harder to understand what the person's saying because it's harder to focus your attention on a certain thing. And so you can imagine it's harder to understand what they're saying, but it's also harder to just generally get the concept of what's going on. And same idea as if you're talking with someone in another language, they don't have anything to draw their attention to what the conversation is supposed to be about. But if I go like this, I'm drawing your attention to the computer, and then that gives you some context from which to infer things. It's almost like in the example with the painting on the wall, right? Is that when we're having a conversation in two different languages, there's something blocking our observation, our information, right? And you can kind of remove that block, maybe not fully, but you can partially remove that block by bringing someone's attention to something. And then once you've done that, maybe you've removed it enough to get things, past the state of not being able to understand each other.
Yeah, but why does the fact of pointing direct a person's attention? Why doesn't it mean something else? Like, we have different languages.
Oh, right, like
different, like, it splits off into multiple things, but if we do this, pointing towards a wall, but why do we all understand that? Why can't someone understand this as, like, if I say this, that means I'm pointing toward, means I'm trying to read attention that way?
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I can continue to speculate, but it's not going to be true at all. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So the real question is then how would you go about answering that question? So maybe you could train people to like respond to these types of points as that way and see if they can do it just as well. There's a cool thing, slightly related but slightly unrelated. Let me see if I can pull it up here. About innate systems of attention. Yeah, have you guys seen this before?
Yeah.
So try and read these words, and I want you to tell me the word and not the color. So let's start. Yellow, blue, orange, black, red, green, purple, yellow, red, orange, green, blue, blue, red, purple, yellow, red, green. All right, now we're going to do it the other way. Now we're going to try the color and not the word.
Green, red, blue, yellow, blue, black, red, green, blue, black,
Purple, blue, red, black, yellow.
So that was a lot harder, huh? I gave up about halfway through. You guys are smarter than me, so you did better. Maybe your young minds are more flexible than mine is. But I think try and answer your question with this, is I think there are, to some degree, innate systems that are used to sort of transform our information and guide us to actions, right? And so it's easier for us, and maybe because we often, when we see words, so maybe it's not innate, maybe again this is prior, right? When we see a word, we understand the meaning of the word to be due to the letters and not the color of the word. And therefore, we have an easier time reading the words rather than saying what the color is. Because when we look at orange, our brain first thinks, that's a word, and that word is orange. And then some other mechanism has to kick in and say, oh no, wait, I'm supposed to say the color, blue. And that's why it's harder, because you have to wait for this first thing to stop, and then the second thing to kick in. So maybe another Bayesian example. Bayes is everywhere. This is what it comes down to. Cool.
There's an interesting fact. I think there's a court ruling in England that ruled against something because they didn't allow. So I think it was, I forgot what specifically it was about, but basically to defend like one of the I think it's a defendant used like Bayes' theorem to conduct certain like results, and apparently the judge was like, no.
Like the judge didn't know the math, and it was like,
I think the idea is that they think that the process is legitimate, but you're throwing in garbage. So if you're throwing in garbage, you're getting garbage out.
I see.
So, or something like that. But basically, it was kind of like controversial because statisticians were like, oh, but Bayes' law is totally legit. Like, why are you? So I don't know. Bayes' theorem is basically the conditional probability that you can calculate. It gives you a way of calculating conditional probabilities. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, do you guys think that it's okay to use mathematics to describe, like, you know, you have this information, is it okay to make a legitimate conclusion out of mathematics? You know, it's something to think about, I think.
Well, probability is something.
Right, because, I mean, there are a lot of, like, judges, right? They're not mathematicians. They don't understand the mathematics behind it. So, like, do you think it's okay to use mathematics to convince them? Because
Well, if it involves probability, I don't think so, because then there's a chance that they're right, that the person is true, is lying.
But what if the probability comes out to be 99.9%?
There's that 0.1%. It does not matter. It's still
Yeah, I suppose. So, I mean, it's a good question to think about, right? Like, how certain do you have to be? Like, how certain does mathematics have to be to? So, I mean, I think it's interesting.
I could say 2 plus 2 equals 4, and that's 100%.
Right.
2 plus 2 equals 5, and then
But,
0.
for example, my probability of passing through this wall right now is like, it's non-zero. Theoretically speaking, there's a possibility that I can pass through this wall. Somehow my atoms will rearrange itself and just pass right through. Non-zero probability. But I know it's not going to happen because my probability is pretty big, 99.9, I don't know how many nines after it. So it's still not 100% exactly. So where is the line? It's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, and especially for us experimenters. So when you do experiments, you often report your results in significance. So this is a significant effect in the sense that it's only 5% unlikely that it was by random chance that it happened. And then somebody else has another significant effect, and that was only 5% random. So in experimental science, we can't really prove anything. We can only sort of say that we haven't shown it to be not true. And so oftentimes, and this is happening more and more now, is that past experiments, they try and repeat them, and they realize, oh no, it didn't work this time. And maybe because the one time that it worked out was that 5% chance that it happened. So yeah, we're never going to get 100%, so you got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
All right, I think the next class is lining up, guys, so let's let them get in. Well, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun the rest of the day. And yeah, go NYU.